Welcome to Elemental Energy, where we simplify decarbonization. As the world continues to consume more and more energy, we must figure out how to meet its demands while ensuring the power we generate is reliable, clean, and affordable. By bridging the gap between oil and gas and electricity and decarbonizing steps along the way, there's a good chance we can achieve energy sobriety. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. Today's episode is a real treat. I have a CEO from my home state, well, not technically my home state, I now call it my home state of Idaho, who I spoke with her a few months back, and I realized that what she is doing to deliver clean, reliable, and affordable energy to her people, I feel it's even setting a higher bar for other states, because she is doing it with what I like to call energy sobriety in mind. She has the right mix going on. She is doing all of the right energy resources, from hydropower to solar to natural gas, and she's bringing it all in. So without further introduction, Lisa Grill, welcome to Elemental Energy.
Thank you so much. And I'm just so pleased to be here. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the conversations that you're having with your podcast, because I think it brings together different perspectives that we're going to need to really consider as we all navigate this, because the stakes are high and it impacts everybody. And so I think you have to take in a lot of different perspectives to make sure that we're all successful.
Before we even jump into our conversation, would you help paint the picture of your geographical remit in the area that you serve?
Yes, I would love to. Well, it's beautiful. It's been discovered now for that beauty and high quality of life. I am a fourth generation Idahoan, so I've been in the Boise area, and my family has been in the Boise area for a very long time, before Idaho was a state, actually, and I'm really proud of that. Idaho is actually very diverse when you think about the geography. There's a lot of high desert, certainly, but we have mountains, we have urban, we have ag, we have very rural, we have areas where there are very few people. I mean, it's all of the above. And so it's 24,000 square miles that we serve. We've got about over 630,000 customers, which is a meter. That means we serve well over 1 million people, and that is growing. We are one of the fastest growing utilities in the country right now. A lot of that had started before the pandemic, but it really picked up during the pandemic when people came here and decided, well, this is really wonderful. I think I'll stay here, and told their friends, apparently. And just basic in-migration has been on a steady trajectory upward. But now we're starting to see those mega loads. So Meta and Micron both have projects that are underway. And these are, it used to be that we would get excited about, a 1 megawatt load or maybe a 5 megawatt load, but these are hundreds of megawatts that are showing up. And it's starting to be an ecosystem that now other mega loads are showing up and wanting to site here as well. Because once you get some of the infrastructure in place, like the water systems and the fiber systems and the basic, in addition to the electrical system, others want to show up too. We're really excited about that, but we are on track to double the size of our company in terms of our capital investment in 5 years. We're 109 years old as a company. And so to think about what it took for 109 years, we're going to double in 5. And again, that's in capital investment. So you can do all the math on inflation and whatnot, but it is a daunting task. And we are working towards a clean portfolio, of which we are 50% hydro roughly, which is a very unique position to be in. We mostly we have 17 hydro facilities on the Snake River and its tributaries. Obviously, water is a really big deal in Idaho, being an ag state. When you think about the history of Idaho Power factors in, it's really has been an important development of electrification, going back to the days where if you couldn't pump the water, you couldn't irrigate the farms. So we have been right along with the ranchers and the miners and the farmers to provide them with electricity to grow the economy that we enjoy today. So there's just this historic nature to everything that we do. We're really not able to do more hydro. Certainly, we've been able to increase efficiencies here and there, but it's not like we're going to build another dam at this point and be able to generate the kind of production that we do today. So we've had to go into more diverse generation like coal and gas and solar and wind and storage. Back in the 70s, when coal was such a plentiful resource, and literally, I remember I wasn't actually at Idaho Power in the 70s, but the stories that are told was too cheap to meter. Like it was just going to be so much, so plentiful. So you can see kind of the backdrop of why certain things happened at a certain time. We are in the process of changing all of our coal to gas as part of that clean journey. So it's very much in motion that there is so much change happening all at once. And so we're being very, very thoughtful in how we go about this. I want to back up just a minute and say, at the core of what we do, we serve our customers with safe, reliable, affordable, clean energy. And it's in that order. And we could talk more about that, but I just want to set that as kind of the basis for what we talk about today, because we'll go back to that time and time again as we are doing our planning, because it's great that we want to be clean, but it won't matter if we can't be safe. And if we can't be safe, it doesn't matter that we're reliable, right? So it's these not trade-offs, but it is the tenets that safe, reliable, affordable can't be violated to get to clean. It's got to be balanced as we go forward.
You just summarized energy sobriety beautifully, is through that safe, reliable, affordable, and clean. I'm very curious because you just mentioned something about the influx of data centers that are coming. Can you explain how do we prioritize our power to the customers versus to the data centers? I know that they're projected to have some time out, but I mean, it's our goal to serve our customers. So how do we navigate bringing on more infrastructure to support these things that aren't necessarily a need? They're just a luxury.
Our philosophy has always been that growth pays for growth. So to the extent that infrastructure project only benefits a single customer, we ask them to pay for it. Now, certainly, that last home that is in a neighborhood, we don't ask them to build a transmission line. There is a certain amount of things that provide benefit that is needed for growth, but provides benefit to everyone to maintain that safety, reliability, and affordability. So there are things that we do socialize in our rate making, but there are things that we do not. And that balance does help offset or not allow costs that shouldn't be borne by the rest of the customers. It assigns them to the cost causer, if you will. So we work really hard with our regulator and both the new customer as well as the existing customers to make sure that we're making choices that those that benefit from the asset pay their fair share. That's really an important concept as these mega loads show up. Certainly, socializing costs is embedded in rate making because, as I mentioned, we have some very rural communities that if we made them pay for a line extension or a transmission line or something, now certainly there are costs that those individual customers have to bear, but an entire community would just be really cost prohibitive for them to be served. And we are a regulated monopoly, and we get our franchise territory, and in exchange, we have the obligation to serve. And so we don't get to say, no, that's too expensive, we're not going to serve you. We have to make sure that we offer them rates that are fair and just and reasonable, and that they are paying for things that they cause, that they benefit from alone. And that is kind of how rates are made, but it isn't a determination that we individually make as a company as to whether or not we're going to serve them. So it sometimes can be a negotiated thing. We work tightly with our regulator to make sure that that our rate making process produces the most, fair and just rates.
Lisa, there are a lot of listeners who are coming from unregulated markets, i.e. hydrocarbons, oil and gas. Would you take a minute to just describe what a regulated market entails for the utility side?
Again, the concept of a regulated monopoly is that, we are a for-profit entity, but we don't get to set our own prices. We have to go to our regulator and demonstrate all the investments we've made, walk through why they were in the best interest of the customers. And if we demonstrate that, then they allow us to put those into rates and recover our costs. And if not, if we can't make that case, they do not allow us to recover them. Now, we have a very good relationship with our regulators. We really work hard at that. Trust is just a huge part of how we operate. Integrity is one of and respect are two of our values. It's one of those things that I press hard in our culture to make sure that we do everything with great transparency so that people are never wondering, are we really doing this for our benefit, or are we doing it for the customer's benefit? And I assure you, we are always working for our customers. Certainly, we do have equity owners, and we're proud of that too, and they are an important part of how we serve our customers, how we raise the capital. But I think sometimes people think that monopolies just get to do whatever they want. And a regulated monopoly is a very big difference. Now, we are also regulated by FERC, in addition to being a regulated entity by the state. FERC regulates our interstate commerce. So to the extent we are buying and selling energy across state lines, FERC sets rules about that as well. So we have a lot of regulators that and a lot of compliance challenges and obligations that we take very seriously. And we certainly have the opportunity to do energy trading, for example, but we always have to demonstrate that we were doing it, without taking risks that our customers bear inappropriately. So there's rules around that too. So yeah, we are not in a deregulated market for sure in Idaho or in Oregon. We have our franchise territory that is granted by the state, and therefore we have the obligation to serve as a result.
I am still truly trying to wrap my head around the regulated versus non-regulated utility markets. Meredith Angwin's book was a really good teaser for me to start trying to just grasp that. And it's a totally different world from the hydrocarbon space, where these are all typically private or major corporations that were serving a stakeholder, but it's still not a regulated market. So I think that's where there's a big disconnect for trying to step into some of these projects that have a lot of electricity involvement. We have delays that we didn't account for because we don't necessarily fully understand the regulations around it. So having those specialty consultants, and it's an amazing meld that I'm starting to see between hydrocarbon space and electrical. Like it's been cool.
It is becoming a much bigger part of these big businesses that have now are understanding how critical electricity is to their planning and their strategies, and what regulatory delays, because there are these really long processes that we go through to make decisions, and they're much more used to, very quick turnarounds. And so we're trying to adapt as well. But you're right, there's sort of this, I don't want to say collision, but that's the word that's coming to mind, where we really have to align expectations about what is possible and why things are the way they are. But that's not to say that things can't change. They certainly can. And we're trying to adapt to things. For example, with Micron and Meta, they really wanted to be served with clean energy. So we came up with a new product called Clean Energy Your Way, where we are building a resource for them. But we had to go to the PUC and ask for that product to be allowed. And they did, but it took a few years to get that through. So It would seem like, well, gosh, if they want it, why can't you just build it and be done with it? And some things just take time. And again, not to say that we can all improve process, we can, but there is a reason why things take a little time, because they're making decisions for a lot of people and they want to make sure they get it right.
Thanks for sharing that perspective. I have a question for you. I would love to hear what your definition of the electrification movement is, because to so many people it is so different. And so, sitting from the hydrocarbon space, talking to utilities, I really want to know, when somebody asks you, what does the electrification movement mean? What do you think?
As the leader of an electric utility, we're pretty excited about it. It's all about balance. And you and I were just talking about the sort of tectonic forces that are really building mountains that can become obstacles. I was sharing a story with you about how I was explaining the economy. If you think about the economy as an airplane that we're trying to keep aloft, and I was sharing this story with the Federal Reserve Board in San Francisco, and I heard a term that is in the pilot world, they call it controlled flight into terrain. And what that means is that when you are flying so fast and you think you're in control, but in fact you are not, and it's up until the time that they drive the plane into the ground or into the side of the mountain, they realize that they were not actually in control. So certainly, the economy is flying along. The Fed is trying to adapt with the levers they have, whether it's interest rates, full employment, price stability, and those are all great. But the mountain that's getting built, when you're thinking about electrification, people think that that is really important to help with climate change. And I don't disagree. But there's also the exuberance of AI and data processing, all the things that, the economic benefits that will, and technologic benefits that will bring. There's also just the capital intensive things that we have to build to make all that happen. And in the time frame they wanted is another pressure. When you think about wildfire risk, that is another pressure that people are very concerned about. It makes it so that it can be difficult in an assessment of risk, difficult to go out and raise capital to accomplish the things that we just talked about. And that's another pressure. So this mountain is sort of building. And my concern is that we won't see it before the economy crashes into it. So electrification is really important, but we have to make sure that we understand what that actually means and the timelines in which we can do it, so that we can relieve some of the pressure maybe from these other areas. If we look at it and take it as look at all the problems at once versus taking the one that we like the best and pushing that one, there's other forces that then respond to that. So I think it is something that can be done, but we have to do it smartly. And we have to remember that the laws of physics are still in effect, and they will always win. No matter how many man-made laws or enthusiasm we have for things we're really passionate about, the laws of physics just don't care. And you think about, we're moving these electrons around at the speed of light. If it gets out of balance, it will shut down. It doesn't take very long for things to come to a just screeching halt when our product isn't available. So again, safe, reliable, affordable, clean. People don't like it when, they're saying, well, we can just do it all with wind and solar. Well, great, but, the sun goes down every single day and the wind doesn't always blow. And storage is great, but it lasts about 4 hours. And that's great in the summertime. It's a really perfect match with our peak load, which we are a summer peaker, but we also have a winter peak. There's a lot of electric heating in Idaho. When it gets, shorter days, very cloudy, we'll get these inversions that will hang around for weeks. Those 4-hour batteries don't do much. They become actually more load because you're charging them off the grid. So it doesn't quite match up. So if we continue on the trajectory that we're on, we're going to have to build more gas in the short run. And we can talk more about what the exciting things that are coming down the road, but they're not here now. And the demand is showing up now. That doesn't mean that we're not completely committed to, I want to say our goal of cleaning our portfolio over time. We're still looking at that. We're still doing that. We've got to be realistic about what we can do and the time frame we're doing it. And like I think I mentioned, if I didn't, I'll say it again. Like on our coal plants, we are converting those to gas. It'll cut our emissions in half, our carbon emissions, but it doesn't cut them to zero, because the trajectory is just not going to be straight down as we're, again, working to electrify, working to power new loads. We've got to make sure we don't take any of these base load flexible resources out of the solution set too early.
Reliability, that's what's so important too. So I might be exposing my underbelly here, but I'm okay with this because 2.5 years ago, when I was still fully immersed in hydrocarbon scene and not really understanding the power generation or utility space, when somebody said the electrification movement, the first thing that would come to my mind at that time is electric cars, and thinking of living in North Idaho, not having the ability to charge because we are in the middle of nowhere. It takes 3 hours to get from Bonner's Ferry to Whitefish, and there is nothing in between. That was where my mindset was at. And the last 2.5 years journey, to hear you say the bigger picture of electrification from your side, I'm like really affirmed that I'm starting to like figure things out a bit better, because I understood it and I heard it. And that bigger vision is exactly what I want to be able to share to others, is that this is so much bigger. It's going to take both oil and gas and electricity to move into the electrification movement, because we're only growing. Our population 200 years ago was 1 billion. It is now 8.1 billion. And it's only projected to continue to grow. And like you're saying, the influx of people coming into Idaho. So I just really admire that you are taking the approach of safe and reliable because we need to serve our people first too. So that's amazing.
It's funny, when we do our analysis of electrification of movement, it's not as much load as one would think. I don't know if lithium ion batteries are really the long-term solution for electric vehicles. The range anxiety is real. I've actually experienced it myself. You've got to get out there and start developing the technology. And I know that, somewhere in a lab or in a college campus somewhere, maybe the technology is just underway. And there are some that their driving habits lend itself very well to lithium ion capabilities. But boy, when it gets cold, it changes everything. And we live in a pretty, we get temperature diversity in Idaho, so it isn't a great fit if you live in an area where you need 2 hours. You've got to drive a couple hours. You can get stranded. So it's not nothing against EVs. We certainly see the opportunity and embrace it. We have some in our fleet, so we're trying it out. We want to meet our customers where they are and help facilitate what they want to accomplish. I just think there's some things that they're evolving to.
Lisa, I am a huge fan of nuclear. Can you explain how Idaho is adopting nuclear into this goal of it's 100% renewable power by 2045, right?
It's actually clean. And I want to talk a little bit about why the difference. So when you say something is renewable, that means it has to qualify to have a renewable energy credit, which is kind of this fictional, for lack of a better word, environmental attribute that you can actually monetize. You can sell it to somebody that needs that credit in their emission calculation. Strangely, hydro isn't considered renewable. Some run-of-river plants are, but if you have a impoundment, if you have a reservoir, generally it's not considered renewable. Even though it doesn't emit carbon, somehow somebody didn't, they made that decision. They clearly didn't ask me. And then if you build a new hydro, it could qualify for renewable energy credit. So it isn't something that's a real straight line on what is or isn't, but there are rules about the claim that you can make about energy that is renewable, and that's very defined. So we say clean, meaning it does not produce carbon when you are creating that megawatt of energy. Our goal is to be 100% clean with our company-owned assets by 2045. And we say it's a goal, not a commitment, because we can get to about 80 to 85% with the portfolio we have now by about the end of this decade. But that last 15 to 20%, we actually don't know how we're going to get there. Making it a hardcore commitment, we want to be very clear, we can't violate safe, reliable, affordable. So, if we get to 90, 95% clean, we say that's an A, right? So we're being realistic about what's possible. So back to your question, how are we thinking about nuclear? It is something that I'm really excited about. As you know, we have the Idaho National Lab here in Idaho, which is such an amazing resource. The site is the size of Rhode Island. And so it has such a storied history. That's a whole other podcast to have about the history of the INL. But that's where the first nuclear power light bulb in the world was illuminated, in Atomic City, Idaho. And so the breeder reactors that they have developed there, they process spent fuel for the Navy. They are becoming really a test bed for these small modular nuclear reactors, including one that they're making their own design. There's lots of challenges for sure. Uranium mining and enrichment is not a small challenge, but I like to say it's an engineering problem. And there's a lot of really smart people that are working on that and seeing the absolute necessity. We also are watching carefully. We don't have any nuclear power on our system today. And so we are working with the INL to learn more about it. Because if we are ever going to cite something, a site the size of Rhode Island with people that have been around it and understand it, it seems like a perfect partnership. I also am told, and I don't want to sound like an expert because I'm not, but the generation 3 versus generation 4 fuels, what I understand is it's harder. I will say, I don't want to say impossible because there's always smart people that will figure it out, but it's harder to weaponize and further enrich generation 4 fuels. And so, that might be something that would be more interesting. It certainly might, sort of change the security footprint or, the risk of handling that kind of fuel. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. We work very closely with INL and there's probably, half a dozen different vendors that are working with the INL to sort of have them host their test units. And so we'll see what happens. I still sort of feel like we're probably about 10 years out, just given, I know NuScale was going to site there, and then there was sort of people that were going to take the power. I think they just couldn't get enough subscription. So it was more an economic decision. I still think it's a great design, and maybe it was a right project, wrong partner at the time. We'll see kind of what they do going forward. But we're very bullish on nuclear. What do you think?
I'm so glad you asked. I think that there is a new market emerging for small modular reactors, that it's no longer serving only the utility space. And by offering novel or new applications for these advanced reactors, like integration into oil and gas refineries, the petrochemical side, the industrial applications of small modular reactors, is going to allow for more funding to be focused on these small modular reactors, which will help them come to fruition much more quickly, because now it's multiple markets that are opening up to support these SMRs versus just the large utility scale spaces. So that was the big focus of the Advanced Reactor Summit that I was at 2.5 weeks ago. And there are oil and gas majors, this company called Natura Resources, who Doug Robeson is not only pouring into developing the reactor, this research reactor, but he's also pouring into developing the workforce that will follow it by putting it into Abilene Christian University here in Texas. And I think it's just this amazing, I don't want to use the word renaissance because I don't think it's even a renaissance. It's just a totally new movement for nuclear, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people that were around for, when the nuclear reactors were sort of being built in the 70s and 80s, maybe even a little bit before that, there is some analogies to it for sure, but it's very different technology. I will be surprised if, Vogtle, in my mind, is probably the last really big nuke plant that will be built. I could be wrong, but just given the amount of capital and how big it is, and I just think the small modular reactors do have a lot more application, and I find it interesting too on sort of how the steam cycle can be utilized in a number of ways as well. Electricity just being one of them. How many times you convert energy into the next thing, I think is another one of those things that kind of interests me on what's possible.
Oh, yes. The thermal heat application for cement, steel, all of those very hard to decarbonize industrial processes. Like I said, so many markets opening up. Something else that has come to the surface is that oil and gas we have been building projects, mega projects. You think of, Hebron and the major offshore oil rigs, that modularizing those things is absolutely necessary because you don't even have a lay down yard in order to put the, piping and different things into it. So these have to be prefabricated, pre-commissioned, to where when you put them out in the middle of the ocean, they are plug and play. And I think that mindset, now that we're starting to have the integration of oil and gas into this utility space, I don't want to think that the major nuclear scene is dead yet, because I think that now that they are seeing this possibility of opening, of bringing those kind of project management skills into the realm of nuclear, like Vogtle, one of the biggest issues with that was that modularization side of things. I think that we're going to start seeing even some an insurgence there, because they're seeing the practices that we can develop from oil and gas into the construction of these large scale reactors. So
interesting. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I think about from a reliability perspective is if you can, if you have a plant that's like 2,000 megawatts, losing that plant can be kind of a big impact to the grid. Whereas if you could break it up into 10, 200 megawatt units, there is a kind of built-in redundancy that I think is really interesting. So modularizing, when you take it down for maintenance, for example, if you only had to take one of the 200 megawatt units, you'd still have the rest of it available versus taking the whole thing down. So it's things like that, there are applications for all of the above. Our company just doesn't have the balance sheet where we could put a 2,000 megawatt nuke generator, on the ground in Idaho. Southern companies certainly, can. But yeah, so I think there are really interesting applications.
I could talk to you all day, I'm sure, just because I'm enjoying hearing it from a perspective of a leader who is approaching this realistically and approaching it in the mind of, or a heart of a servant to take care of the people that she is serving. But is there anything else that you think is really important to add to this conversation for our listeners today?
I do. I have one that is something that people don't think a lot about. And that is, we talk a lot about, new kinds of technologies, and that's all exciting. But what it's going to require, the clean energy transition is going to require more transmission. That's just block and tackle wires. And it's very hard to build. Because nobody wants it near them. There is a permitting process that seems to never end. We have been trying to permit a 300-mile line into Central Oregon for 18 years. We joke that it's now old enough to vote, and by the time it gets energized, it will be old enough to drink. If we're going to transition the economy, it cannot take 18 years to build a transmission line. And when you think about the grid, as you were talking about, there are places that it absolutely has to be reinvested, expanded. It's just not going to work without it. Because when you think about the diversity of the grid and the loads that we are kind of in the middle of the Northwest and in between the Northwest and the Southwest, where there's lots of solar in the Southwest, there's lots of hydro in the Northwest, there's lots of wind on the East side, there's lots of everything coming out of California. To the extent we can move those really rich, clean resources from where it's made to where it can be used at almost the speed of light requires transmission. And there are lots of studies that are showing that we need probably 3 times the amount of transmission that we have today to make this all work. We have been working on several lines. So there's the Boardman to Hemingway is the one I'm talking about. There's, and we're partners with PacifiCorp on that. We're also partners with them on a line called Gateway West. And then there's one called the Southwest Intertie that goes from central Idaho down to Nevada. And we call the collection of those 3 lines the Intermountain Intertie. And so it connects us to all those markets, and so that it can come to us and through us. And it will be this super highway for clean energy to move around the Western grid. And it's just absolutely critical. It's just absolutely critical that these lines get built. And it is not easy to do. And I know the Biden administration, is talking about it, but and they've just recently announced some corridors of national interest. But I will tell you that the Boardman to Hemingway line was one of the Obama administration's lines that they assigned a rapid response team to, and still are waiting our way through permitting. So that just has to get fixed. And it's not that we shouldn't have public process. We just need to not make it where each process runs in series. We need to have them run in parallel to collaborate and coordinate so we can make sure that we're doing the responsible things, but getting them to the finish line much quicker, because it's just going to really stall what's possible, in my opinion. So it's something that we think a lot about. I am hearing more and more concern and attention, which is the, I think policy follows that, but we keep ringing the bell saying there's some real challenges here that we've just got to face, and no amount of ignoring it is fixing it.
Lisa, enlighten me and help me learn, where is the majority of these materials for transmission and distribution lines coming from?
Right now, I think we are getting our steel from India and Turkey, actually. I know that those were the 2 places that we went to, work with the contracts. Whether we just did one or the other, I'm not sure, but it's overseas. Our conductor, I believe, is US based, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't get into those details as much, but we did a worldwide sort of look at where we could get that infrastructure. So it's, it is a lot of aluminum and a lot of steel for sure.
I can't even imagine what trying to establish a supply chain based off of waiting on permitting would look like. That's so complex.
Well, it is. And obviously we weren't really going out until we got to the point where we hit certain milestones in the permitting process. We didn't go out and try to secure supply chain. When we could kind of see the end of the tunnel coming, we would go out, and because you have to get in the queue, right? Because that's the other challenge is, how much risk do you take to get into the queue for production? And so you could meet the timeline knowing that you haven't quite got to the finish line with the permit. So there is a lot of really deep strategic thought in how to construct the contracts and how you work with even the construction companies. We don't want to have them moving up and then going, oh, never mind. And, it just adds to the expense and delay. So it is a big, big project. And I have the most amazing team that's working on it. What we do is not, you've got to be really tenacious and really believe in what you're doing to keep going when it seems like the goalpost keeps moving for sure.
Lisa, I am going to end our episode with certainly a thank you, but also the best of luck to you and your amazing team to double in 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and
great.
I just want to appreciate you for the work that you're doing. I hope, I would just love to stay in contact with you. I feel like we have a kind of a kindred spirit that, or kindred spirits that we both really care about what this looks like and why it's important. And I appreciate that you are working for, oil and gas industry, but you're looking to the future and you're doing it in such a thoughtful way. And I think the more that we can all learn how to communicate with one another and talk each other's language and appreciate the really important value we bring to this problem, we will get this done. And we can lead the world in doing it. We just kind of sometimes have to get out of our own way. And so thank you for this just great opportunity to just talk about the basics of how it works and why it's important. So thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. Hence the elemental energy, trying to help all those people get down to the basics. Everybody listening, as always, stay happy, but most importantly, stay safe. All right, here is a bonus. Nicholas Hunt, this one is a thank you to you. When I was originally thinking about starting Elemental Energy, I was working with an individual who had the curiosity, who was so driven, who was so helpful, who understood that he didn't know a bigger picture, but dove in, asked the questions, and really wanted to make a difference in delivering a sustainable world. So my friend Nicholas Hunt, who I named my avatar after for Elemental Energy, this is a specific thank you to you for introducing me to Lisa, because the conversation that was just had was absolutely eye-opening and brilliant to help others kind of see the higher level of utility side of things, and a state who is approaching it with safe, reliable, affordable, and clean, which is also a testament to the energy sobriety of making sure that we take care of our people through this and that we don't just hit that mountain because we're going full tilt and trying to deliver clean energy. So thank you all so much for listening today. As always, if you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Marcia Leonard, Marcia Leonard, Leonard. Take care.